February 1943. In Stalingrad's shattered ruins, a German soldier scrawls, "Tomorrow we surrender, God save us." 91,000 men, fathers, sons, Waffen-SS, are trapped in a Soviet noose, their white flags raised in vain. Siberia's Gulags beckon, a frozen hell of starvation and labor. Only 5,000 return. What horrors crushed these men in Siberia's depths? Could they escape the sins of their invasion, map their desperate journey, and uncover a saga that haunts history's soul? This documentary honors suffering, not war's glory. Stalingrad, February 2nd, 1943. The Battle of Stalingrad, a 6-month crucible of blood and ice, ends in Soviet triumph. The German 6th Army, once a 300,000-man juggernaut, is trapped in a frozen kessel, a cauldron of death. Starvation, frostbite, and Soviet assaults have claimed 200,000 lives. General Friedrich Paulus, defying Hitler's suicidal orders, surrenders. 91,000 Germans, infantrymen, tank crews, Waffen-SS elites lay down their arms, their eyes hollow with fear and hope. They're about to face a fate that makes Stalingrad's horrors seem merciful. The Soviet 62nd Army, under General Vasily Chuikov, achieved the impossible, holding Stalingrad against relentless odds. Their victory turned World War II's tide, but at a staggering cost, over 1 million Soviet soldiers and civilians dead. Imagine the pain, mothers burying children in bombed-out basements, fathers watching their city burn. A Soviet mother, Anna Petrova, wept as she hid her son's body under rubble, whispering, "They'll pay for this." This fueled a searing hatred for the German invaders, who torched villages and slaughtered millions. The captives, from battle-scarred veterans to boys barely 18, were skeletal, their uniforms rags in -40-degree cold. Of the 91,000, 24,000 were wounded, all starving, scraping frozen grain from rubble to survive. The German collapse wasn't just physical, it was a shattering of the soul. Letters home, seized by Soviet intelligence, drip with despair. One soldier wrote, "I see my wife's face, but I fear I'll never hold her again." Another scrawled, "Hitler promised victory, but left us to die." A young lieutenant, Karl Weiss, broke down in a bombed-out factory, sobbing, "We're forsaken," as his men starved around him. Even Waffen-SS fanatics, once unshakable, whispered mutiny in Stalingrad's ruins, their Nazi ideals crumbling under hunger's grip. For the Soviets, Stalingrad was a wound that bled rage. Stalin's Order, number 227, not a step back, made retreat a death sentence, forging a defiance that crushed German hopes. Chuikov's men fought from sewers, cellars, and shattered factories, each block a testament to their refusal to break. A Soviet nurse, Maria Ivanova, later recalled binding wounds in a basement as bombs fell, whispering to dying soldiers, "We'll make them pay." This wasn't just a battle. It was a vendetta etched in blood and snow. The Soviet strategy was a masterstroke of encirclement, mapped like a tightening noose. General Georgy Zhukov's operation, Uranus, launched in November 1942, saw Soviet forces, over 1 million strong, sweep around the 6th Army, cutting them off from supplies. Maps of the Volga steppe show red pincers closing in, German blue pinned in a shrinking pocket. Soldiers felt the trap tighten, rations dwindled, frostbite crept in, and Soviet shells rained day and night. A German private wrote, "The Reds are everywhere. We're caged animals." The psychological torment was relentless. Men saw comrades die in agony, their own minds fraying under the weight of defeat. One soldier hallucinated his family in the snow, whispering their names until he collapsed. The kessel wasn't just a battlefield, it was a crucible of despair, where hope withered in the ice. I'm Hans Becker, Private 6th Army. Surrender felt like relief at first. My stomach was empty. my feet frozen black. The Soviets herded us with rifles, shouting. I prayed I'd see my family, but fear gripped me. We were at their mercy. The surrender was chaos incarnate. Soviet troops, weary but fierce, rounded up captives amid Stalingrad's rubble. Archival footage captures gaunt men stumbling through snow, hands raised, their breath clouds in the icy air. The 91,000 included 22 generals, 2,500 officers, and countless soldiers, plus Waffen-SS units like the Leibstandarte, loathed for their brutality. The Soviets, scarred by German atrocities, 2 million Soviet captives perished in Nazi camps, showed little mercy. Some guards, survivors of Stalingrad's hell, spat on prisoners, their eyes blazing with vengeance. A Soviet sergeant, Ivan Volkov, whose family died in a German raid, kicked a captive, snarling, "You burned my home." Others, hardened by loss, saw the captives as trophies of Soviet resilience. A Soviet officer later wrote, "They came to destroy us, but we broke their spine." The captives marched eastward to transit camps under armed guard. Soviet records detail the scale, 91,000 men scattered across a city of ash. Why so harsh? Stalin saw them as propaganda tools, but also as enemies who'd ravaged his nation. The Red Army had lost 20 million lives by 1943. Compassion was a distant memory. The captives' stories, raw like those on mourningtheancient.com, marked the start of a journey that would claim nearly all their lives. For the 91,000 German captives, surrender was no salvation. It was the gateway to hell. They faced a brutal trek to Soviet prison camps, a journey so deadly it became the Death March. Starved for months, some hadn't eaten since November, they trudged through Stalingrad's steppe in -40-degree cold. Frost-bitten limbs failed, boots dissolved into rags. Soviet guards, often starving themselves, drove them without pity. How did men cling to life in this frozen nightmare? Their words sear the soul with tales of agony and defiance. The captives formed columns stretching miles, shadowed by Soviet riflemen. Food was a cruel jest, frozen bread or watery soup, barely 200 calories daily. Dysentery and typhus ravaged them, dropping men like flies. Soviet records estimate 30,000 to 35,000 died on the march, their bodies abandoned in snowdrifts or heaped in mass graves. The Germans, who'd burned Soviet homes, faced unrelenting retribution. Guards shot stragglers or left them to freeze, their fury a mirror of the invasion's horrors. A guard, Dmitry Kuznetsov, whose brother died in Stalingrad, forced a captive to crawl through snow, shouting, "Feel what we felt." Blizzards erased the fallen, as if the earth itself rejected them. The steppe was a merciless predator. Winds screamed, slicing through threadbare coats. Snow blinded men, who stumbled into ditches or froze mid-stride. Hunger drove some to madness. One captive gnawed a comrade's frozen arm, his mind broken by starvation. Others ate snow, worsening dehydration, or chewed leather scraps from torn boots. Soviet logistics, crippled by war, collapsed under the weight of 91,000 captives. Transit points were death traps, makeshift camps with no heat, no sanitation, just disease and despair. Frostbite turned feet black, gangrene spread unchecked. One captive saw a comrade's foot snap like brittle wood, the scream haunting him for years. Amputations were grim, done with saws, no anesthesia, men biting rags to stifle cries. Yet some found strength in fleeting hopes, whispered tales of home, a shared crust of bread, or a scratched prayer in the snow kept spirits alive. A captive carved his daughter's name into his arm, vowing to live for her. I'm Carl Fischer, Corporal, 6th Army. The march was worse than Stalingrad. My toes were black, boots torn, men fell and guards fired. I dreamed of my mother's voice, but each step felt like my last. The march aimed for transit camps like Beketovka, Suzdal, and Tambov, 100 to 300 miles away. These were overcrowded, filthy, and unprepared. Captives slept on bare floors, lice swarming their rags. Medical care was a myth. Wounds festered, amputations done with rusty blades, no anesthesia. By spring 1943, only 55,000 to 60,000 of the 91,000 lived. The Soviets paraded thousands through Moscow in 1944, a propaganda spectacle of their victory. The march wasn't mere transport. It was a deliberate crucible, echoing the fate of Soviet captives in Nazi hands. The survivors of the Death March, some 60,000 German captives, reached the Soviet Gulags, sprawling labor camps in Siberia's frozen heart. Names like Vorkuta, Krasnogorsk, Camp 126, and Kolyma became their prisons. Here, they faced years of forced labor, starvation, and despair. By 1955, only 5,000 to 6,000 would return home. What was life in these icy hells? Their stories, raw and searing, pull us into a world where survival hung by a thread. The gulags were machines of annihilation. Captives worked 12 to 16 hours daily in coal mines, logging camps, or railroad construction, hacking frozen earth in -50-degree cold. Frostbite claimed fingers, toes, even noses. Men wrapped rags around stumps to keep moving. Rations were a death sentence, 600 to 800 calories, moldy bread, watery gruel, or fish bones. Malnutrition swelled bellies, scurvy rotted teeth, tuberculosis choked lungs. Guards enforced iron discipline. Stealing food meant a beating. Defiance meant icy solitary cells or a bullet. Camp 126, near the Arctic Circle, saw 70% of its captives die by 1945. Kolyma, the white crematorium, was even deadlier. 80% perished within 2 years, their bodies lost in snow. Daily life was a brutal rhythm. Dawn reveille at 4, a whistle slicing the dark. Captives staggered to work, breath freezing in the air. Mines collapsed, crushing bodies. Forests buried men in avalanches. Nights meant unheated barracks, wooden planks for beds, lice and rats as companions. Guards, often war veterans, ruled with fear, their rifles a constant threat. One captive recalled a guard's laugh as he kicked a fallen man, saying, "You burned my village, now dig." A camp hierarchy emerged, cruel and unforgiving. Stronger captives or skilled workers became trustees, earning scraps by enforcing rules. This bred hatred. Fights erupted over a spoonful of gruel. The weak, called goners, faded, their eyes empty. Survival meant navigating this brutal order, where a misstep could end in death. Trustees sometimes hoarded food, watching others starve. In Vorkuta, a carpenter traded a repaired chair for a guard's crust, a fleeting triumph. Yet, acts of kindness flickered. A whispered song, a shared cigarette, or a secret poem scratched on a bunk, binding men against the void. One captive recited Goethe nightly, his voice a frail shield against despair. "I'm Fritz Schmidt, private, 6th Army." Vorkuta was a frozen nightmare. We mined coal, hands bleeding. I ate bark to survive. Friends died, eyes blank. I lived for my wife's memory, but hope was fading. The Soviets singled out Waffen-SS captives, branding them Nazi zealots. Many were executed or worked to death in Kolyma, where the air itself seemed to choke life away. Regular soldiers suffered nearly as much. Medical care was a sick farce. Hospitals were sheds where men died alone, screams echoing. One captive saw a doctor saw a gangrenous leg. No anesthesia, the patient's cries shaking the room. Disease was relentless. Typhus swept camps, leaving bodies stacked. Like cordwood, in Kolyma, men hallucinated loved ones in the snow, their minds unraveling before their bodies gave out. I'm Heinz Müller, Waffen-SS. The Soviets hated us most. We built railroads, no rest, no warmth. Men shot themselves to escape. I survived by numbing my soul, but I still see their faces. Survival demanded cunning. Captives formed secret brotherhoods, sharing smuggled food or letters. Carpenters or mechanics bartered skills for bread. About 2,000 Stalingrad captives joined Soviet anti-Nazi committees, like the National Committee for a Free Germany, broadcasting propaganda for rations. This sparked betrayal accusations. Fistfights broke out, men torn between survival and honor. One captive wrote, "We fought the cold, but also each other." In Vorkuta, a former teacher led a secret revolt, whispering plans until guards crushed it, leaving him frozen in a ditch. The psychological toll was a silent killer. Captives wrestled despair, guilt, and Stalingrad's ghosts. Unsent letters poured out regrets. One read, "I dream of Stalingrad's ruins. It's where I died, though I breathe." Some found solace in tiny acts, carving crosses for the dead, whispering prayers. Others lost faith, spirits shattered by endless cold. Coping rituals emerged, counting mine steps, reciting poems, imagining lost meals. In Krasnogorsk, a captive sketched his family on a plank, staring nightly to remember why he lived. Moral dilemmas haunted them: join anti-Nazi groups and betray comrades, or starve for loyalty. These choices scarred their souls, making survival a Pyrrhic victory. By 1945, only 20,000 Stalingrad captives remained alive. Typhus, hunger, and exhaustion claimed thousands monthly. Soviet records show 3 million German captives died, mirroring the 3,500,000 Soviet captives killed by Nazis. The Gulags were punishment for a nation's sins, yet the captives' humanity flickers in their stories, echoing mourningtheancient.com's raw confessions. The end of World War II in 1945 brought no salvation for Stalingrad's captives. Of the 91,000 taken in 1943, only 20,000 survived the Gulags. The last returned to Germany in 1955, a decade later, forever changed. Their homecoming was a bitter reckoning. Families gone, cities reborn, their stories buried in shame or silence. In West Germany, they were pitied as victims of Soviet cruelty. In East Germany, scorned as war criminals. What legacy did these 91,000 men leave? How does their story echo in our hearts today? The captives' ordeal was a propaganda pawn. Stalin's 1944 Moscow parade of 57,000 prisoners, including Stalingrad survivors, flaunted Soviet might. The Nazis spun their suffering to vilify the Soviets, ignoring their own atrocities. At Nuremberg, the SS faced trials for millions of Soviet captive deaths. Yet Soviet treatment of Germans drew less global outrage. Historians estimate 90% of Stalingrad's captives perished, part of 3 million German deaths in Soviet hands. A grim mirror to the 3,500,000 Soviet captives killed by Nazis. Survivors' memoirs, like those on mourningtheancient.com, pierced the veil of politics. Men like Hans Becker wrote of guilt, loss, and resilience. One diary confessed, "I survived, but left my soul in Siberia." These stories defy simple labels of victim or villain. The captives fought for a genocidal regime, yet their suffering was unimaginable. Some returned to preach peace, joining West German anti-war movements. Others hid their pain, haunted by Vorkuta's mines or Kolyma's ice. The psychological wounds festered. Survivors woke screaming, reliving Stalingrad's ruins or Gulag graves. Families hunted for answers, clinging to faded letters or whispered tales. In the 1950s, West German campaigns rallied for the last prisoners, their plight a national wound. By 1955, only 5,000 to 6,000 returned. broken men in their 30s and 40s, aged beyond their years. Reintegration was brutal, jobs scarce, stigma heavy. One survivor was shunned by neighbors, his survival branded betrayal. Veterans groups offered refuge, where men shared tales too raw for outsiders. Survivor guilt gnawed. Why them when comrades perished? A returned captive wrote, "I live, but carry their ghosts." Some spoke of Siberia's scars in hushed tones, warning of war's cost, their words echoing in modern conflicts like Ukraine's, where prisoners face similar fates. Today, their fate ignites fierce debate. Ex-posts split, some mourn their suffering, others damn their Nazi ties. Historians see a moral labyrinth, men who served evil yet endured hell. Modern Volgograd, once Stalingrad, hosts Mamayev Kurgan, where Russian and German dead are mourned as one. Annual ceremonies unite descendants, laying flowers for closure. German families weep for fathers lost. Russian veterans honor their fallen. The captive's story ripples globally. Think of modern wars, where prisoners vanish into camps, their fates debated in whispers. It's a warning. War strips humanity bare, leaving only scars. Stalingrad's lost army, 91,000 German captives, faded into Siberia's gulags, with only 5,000 to 6,000 returning to tell their tale. Their stories of starvation, labor, and survival rip open the brutal heart of war. Were they victims, invaders, or both? Their raw, haunting accounts demand we face the human cost of conflict. This is one chapter of Stalingrad's saga, but the story isn't over. Subscribe, hit the bell, and comment. Could you endure a Siberian camp? Share your thoughts below. Until then, keep exploring history with Epic War. Keep asking questions, and keep seeking the truth.